Welcome to Night Stories from VHS Era. You've arrived at a place where the glow of old television screens, the hum of rewinding tapes, and the softness of forgotten childhood dreams come alive once more. Each night will take a quiet journey back in time to sleepy suburbs, moonlit driveways, warm summer breezes, and the kind of memories that feel just a little too magical to be real. Here you don't need to worry. Just press play and let the night unfold.
Tonight's journey begins with a question. Do you remember the feeling of stepping scared into a toy store and suddenly forgetting the rest of the world? Have you ever wondered why just the sound of those sliding glass doors could spark so much joy in a child's heart? Was it the lights, the smells, or simply the possibility that something magical was waiting just a few steps away? Tonight, let me take you by the hand and guide you back to a very specific moment in time. A moment wrapped in shiny packaging, lit by fluorescent ceiling lights and lined with aisles that seemed to stretch into forever. This is not just any memory. This is a memory of walking into a Toys R Us in the 90s. So, relax, close your eyes if you wish, and stay with me until the end of the video to rediscover what made those places feel like the doorway to another world. By the time this story ends, you'll remember what it was like to step into a dream, and why that feeling never really left us. The glass doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and right then, I swear to you, it felt like the entire world had changed. That sound was the first signal, as familiar as the dial-up tone on our family's old desktop or the distant chime of the ice cream truck. Inside, the air smelled like new plastic and cardboard and adventure. The lights were bright, not harsh, but bright in the way a dream is right before you wake up, and everything inside shimmered, even if nothing really sparkled. I stood at the entrance just for a second longer than I needed to. I always did, because stepping through those doors wasn't just walking into a store. It was like crossing a line between real life and a place where every wish might actually come true. I used to wonder as a kid, why does this feel so magical? Why does walking into a toy store make me feel like anything is possible? The answer, I think, is simpler than I imagined back then. It was a place built just for us, for kids, a kingdom where our rules, our dreams, and our imagination reigned supreme. Toys R Us wasn't just shelves and price tags. It was a living, breathing world. The moment I stepped inside, I was greeted by a soft symphony of beeping scanners, the distant creak of shopping carts, and that unmistakable low hum of anticipation buzzing in my chest. To the left, rows of neon signage above the aisles blinked, with words like action figures and board games, each one calling me like a siren. To the right, a cardboard cutout of Jeffrey the Giraffe stood tall, smiling as if he remembered me personally, and I believed he did. Sometimes I asked myself, was it the colors that made everything feel alive? 'Cause the reds were redder, the blues almost electric, and even the packaging on the Barbie Dreamhouse sparkled like a jewel. It wasn't just visual though. The magic had a sound too. The squeak of a kid's sneaker on the tile floor, its excited gasp when someone spotted a new Ninja Turtles figure. It's a jingling background tune coming from a Fisher-Price demo toy. All of it, layered together, created something that wasn't just noise. It was memory in motion. My mom would always remind me, we're only here to look. But she said it with a smile, knowing full well that looking was never just looking. Do you remember how hard it was to pick just one toy? As a child, each aisle was a new universe, each turn a new possibility. I remember standing still in the middle of the action figure section, staring at G.I. Joe and Power Rangers figures, trying to decide which one deserved to come home with me. It was the kind of decision that carried the weight of the world. still remember the chill from the air conditioning on my arms, mixing with the warmth of excitement in my chest. My fingers trailed across plastic packaging, glossy and smooth. My eyes darted across shelves. I'd catch my reflection in the shiny metal edge of the shelf and see myself wide-eyed, living the moment I had been waiting for all week. Because a trip to Toys R Us wasn't a routine errand. It was an event, a reward, a memory in the making. And the smell, how do you even describe the smell of a toy store? Do you remember it? It was a blend of plastic from brand new toys, cardboard boxes just opened from delivery, and a faint scent of bubblegum from the coin-operated machines near the entrance. It was the smell of childhood, the scent that now exists only in our minds, but that comes rushing back the second we think of it. There was always one part of the store that seemed quieter than the rest, usually near the back, where the board games were stacked like treasure chests: Clue, Operation, Mousetrap, and of course, Monopoly Box, as familiar as a family photo. I would run my hands along the edges, trying to decide whether today was a game night kind of day or an action figure kind of day, okay? And sometimes I'd just sit on the floor for a moment, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to take it all in. How often do we pause in the middle of joy just to notice it? As kids, we did that without realizing, and as adults, we spend years trying to remember how my mom never rushed me. She let me wander. That was part of the magic, too, the feeling. That time stood still while we were in there. No math homework, no school bullies, no early bedtimes, just possibility. For some reason, no matter how many times we went, it never lost its glow. Maybe that's why, even now, I miss it so deeply. Sometimes I dream of walking through those doors again, of hearing that soft whoosh and stepping into a world where the rules are different, softer, kinder, a world where excitement lived in every corner and the only stress was choosing between a Tamagotchi and a Game Boy game. Do you remember how serious that choice felt? I do. And even though those decisions seem small now, they mattered then. And because they matter to us, they still do. The dream began the moment the doors opened. The lights, the colors, the sounds, and the smell, everything together whispered, "You're home, kid. Take your time." And I did. I always did. By the end of this video, I hope you've remembered not just what the toy store looked like, but what it felt like. It's that moment when your heart beat just a little faster, when your feet bounced with every step, and when all your dreams sat patiently waiting for you on a shelf somewhere near the back, beneath the blinking lights of your favorite aisle dot. And now, let me ask you, do you remember what toy you picked that day? Do you remember how tightly you held it as you walked back through those sliding doors, out into the sun? 'Cause I do. The sliding doors gently closed behind us with that familiar hush, but by then I was already gone. Legs moved on instinct, like they had done this dance 100 times before. I didn't wait for my mom to catch up. I didn't check to see who else was in the store. I didn't even glance at the front displays with their towering Lego sets or the new releases in the glass case. No, I ran straight toward the action figures aisle. Every step echoed slightly on the shiny floor, my sneakers thumping lightly as I passed by blurry glimpses of dolls, puzzles, and RC cars, all flashing by in a streak of color and light. I had one destination, and I knew exactly where it was. It was like visiting old friends, really. There was comfort in knowing they'd still be there. Power Rangers standing proud in their brightly colored boxes, their helmets gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The Ninja Turtles, with their green, molded expressions caught mid-battle. Weapons perfectly placed in the plastic casing. G.I. Joe soldiers, stoic and ready for action, frozen in their eternal missions. These weren't just toys to me. They were characters I had shared whole summers with, battles fought in the backyard and living room adventures that stretched late into the night. The aisle wasn't just shelves of plastic and packaging. It was memory, it was story, but it was home. I slowed down just as I reached the first shelf. My breath was a little quicker, not from running, but from excitement. That bubbling kind of joy that comes from being exactly where you want to be. I let my fingers trail across the front of the boxes, tracing the shapes without opening anything. The packaging was loud, bold fonts shouting things like new morphin, action, or now with real kick. It was always changing slightly, always updating, but the heart of it remained the same. Didn't matter how many times I came here. That first glimpse down the aisle, seeing all those colorful boxes lined up like soldiers ready for roll call, always gave me chills. Did you ever have a favorite figure you always hoped would still be there? I did. Mine was the Red Ranger, always him. Maybe it was the leadership thing, or maybe just the color. But whenever I reached the aisle, my eyes scanned immediately for that flash of red. Some days I found him waiting there like he had been saving a spot just for me. Other times he was gone, and I'd feel a small pang of disappointment, but never enough to ruin the trip. Because even if he wasn't there, someone else always was. That was the thing about those visits. There was always something waiting. Could recognize the figures by memory alone. Just a glimpse of the side of the box was enough. The curve of Donatello's staff or the silver glint of Snake Eyes' visor. Some days, the toy I came looking for would be right there on the front, peg, easy to grab, like it had been placed just for me. Other times, I had to dig a little. I'd move aside the ones in front, carefully peeling them back like layers in a treasure hunt. And then, suddenly, there it was, buried in the middle row, glowing like gold. Behind me, I could hear the gentle sound of shopping carts, a child's laughter from a few aisles over, and a distant, cheerful beeping from the cashier area. But it all faded in comparison to the world I had just entered. I'd pick up a figure, turn it in my hands, read the back of the packaging like it was a sacred text. The bios always fascinated me. There were just a few lines, but they gave each figure a whole story, where they came from, what their mission was, their special powers. It turned each toy into a miniature legend. It made the choice feel bigger, and that was the hard part. How did we ever choose, standing there, surrounded by so many heroes, each one cooler than the last? It felt impossible. Sometimes I'd hold two at once, one in each hand, weighing them, like the decision would affect the fate of the world. Should I go with Raphael, with his angry expression and twin says, or the new version of Storm Shadow with the custom gear? My heart would flip back and forth with every second I could spend what felt like hours in that aisle. I probably did. There was a sense of security in knowing that even if I didn't pick one that day, they would still be here next time, or so I thought. Sometimes a figure would vanish, never to return, replaced by a new wave, a new line, a new trend. That's when the first lessons of growing up quietly slipped in. Nothing lasted forever. Even toy lines had their seasons, but I didn't understand that yet. Not fully. I just knew I had to choose wisely on the bottom shelves. There were often the bigger boxes, playsets, vehicles, the kind of things I could never convince my parents to buy unless it was Christmas or a birthday. The G.I. Joe aircraft carrier was the stuff of legends. It stretched across the whole shelf, massive and full of tiny details. I'd crouch down to get a closer look, press my face to the clear plastic window on the box, and imagine the missions I'd create if it were mine. A boy can dream, right? Do you remember the joy of finding a figure you didn't expect? Like, you came in for one thing, but discovered a brand new release you didn't even know existed. That thrill. It happened to me once with the White Ranger. He had just come out, sleek, mysterious, with gold trim and a tiger on his chest. I spotted him halfway down the aisle, mixed in with the older figures. My heart jumped, my hands trembled a little, and I swear, for a second, everything else disappeared. It was just me and him. I held that box like it was a fragile treasure, afraid to let anyone else see I had found it. I turned to go find my mom, to show her, to begin the slow process of negotiation, but I paused, just for a second. I looked back down the aisle at all the figures still waiting on their shelves. I whispered a silent thank you to them, like a kid thanking his friends after a long day. They didn't speak, but they didn't have to. They'd be there next time, or at least I hoped they would. Walking back toward the front of the store, I carried the White Ranger like a prize. Other kids passed by, some looking with curiosity, maybe a little envy. And I knew that feeling well, because I'd felt it myself when someone else found the toy I had been looking for. But today, it was my turn. Back at the cart, my mom smiled. When she saw the toy in my hands, she didn't say anything, not at first. She looked at me with that mix of recognition and affection only a parent can give. Maybe she saw what I saw. It's not just plastic and paint, but magic. I placed the box carefully in the cart, resting it on top of the other items, like it was a crown jewel. Okay, and for the rest of the trip through the store, I kept one hand on it, as if afraid it might disappear. Later, when we reached the checkout line, I gave the figure one last look before placing it on the conveyor belt. I knew I'd see it again at home, but it still felt like I was saying goodbye to the store version of it. The one surrounded by 100 others, the one I had searched for and found. And as the cashier scanned it, that soft beep rang out, final and satisfying. That was the magic of running straight to the action figures aisle. It wasn't just about buying something. It was about hope, wonder, discovery. It was about revisiting old friends and sometimes making new ones. It was about learning how to choose, how to wait, how to let go, and how to celebrate small victories. And even now, if I close my eyes, I can still feel that moment. My hands brushing over the packaging, the buzz in my chest, the distant music from the store's speakers playing a muffled radio hit from the 90s, and the knowledge that, in that moment, I had everything I needed. After placing the White Ranger gently on the checkout belt, I still felt the warmth of victory in my chest. But the journey through the store wasn't quite over. Like any seasoned visitor of Toys R Us in the 90s, I knew there was one more place I had to stop by before we left. It called to me the way the ice cream truck calls to a neighborhood on a summer afternoon, just as magnetic, just as joyful. I could already picture it in my mind as I veered the cart ever so slightly with my hands, steering us down that sacred path. Did you ever try to be subtle about it? Okay. Pretending to just wander past the aisle by accident, hoping your parents wouldn't notice that you were actually leading them straight to temptation. I did, every time, but let's be honest, I was terrible at it. My eyes gave it away the moment I saw that wall of neon packaging and futuristic foam weaponry. It's that glorious section where the Super Soakers and Nerf blasters lived. If the action figure aisle was where the stories began, this aisle was where they came to life, even before reaching the display. I could spot the bright green and orange plastics from a distance. The Super Soakers were always larger than life, like they had been designed by a mad scientist with a water obsession. Okay. They looked like alien technology, oversized tanks and tubes crisscrossing their bodies, some with dual barrels, others with pressure chambers you could pump with a satisfying squeak, squeak, squeak until your arms ached. There was one I had my eye on that summer, the Super Soaker CPS 1000. Just the name made it sound like a secret agent's code. It had a huge tank, almost half the size of my torso, and a rubberized grip that looked like it could survive an actual war. I remember reaching out and lifting it from the hook, the plastic crinkling lightly in my hands. It had a weight to it, even in the box, and my mind immediately raced ahead to the backyard battles it would bring. I could see myself ducking behind the big tree at the edge of the lawn, waiting for my neighbor Josh to make the first move. Could almost hear the pump, the pressure building, then the perfect release of a water blast so strong it could drench a whole shirt in one hit. Was there ever a better feeling than winning a water fight with the best gear? And then, like clockwork, came the moment of truth. I turned to my mom with the box clutched against my chest, the corners digging slightly into my arms. My face tried to settle somewhere between casual interest and quiet desperation, but she knew. They always knew, didn't they? That look we gave them that meant please, just this once. A please, let today be the day. Mom, I started, my voice slightly higher than normal. Can we maybe just ... look at this one? She raised an eyebrow but didn't say no. That alone gave me hope. It's time, she'd say. We'll see. Which meant there was still a small window. The times it was a soft, firm, not today, and even if it stung, I learned to accept it. But on that day, her expression was neutral, unreadable, like a judge preparing to hear a case. And so I made my plea. I began describing in animated detail how much I needed the Super Soaker, how all the kids in the neighborhood had started bringing their blasters out after school, how mine was last year's model and it leaked if you tilted it too far, how this one, the CPS 1000, was practically a marvel of modern engineering. It's got a pressure chamber that holds more water than any other, I explained, holding the box as if I were defending a thesis, and it shoots 25 feet. I swear, she didn't interrupt. She let me talk, her eyes soft, her lips curled just slightly at the corners. Then she asked, and where exactly would you use it? Backyard. Josh and I already set up teams. We're going to do like a full water battle with rules and flags and everything. I said it so quickly, it all blended together, okay? And if I have this one, I could be team leader. For real. Do you remember making promises you had no way to keep just to convince your parents? That day, I promised to wash the dishes, vacuum, the living room, and even fold laundry without being asked. I might have even added something about getting better grades. Anything to make the deals sound sweeter. My dad came around the corner then, pushing a second cart. He looked at me, holding the blaster like a prize I had won. He squinted at the price tag and gave one of those slow nods dads give when they're calculating value versus pleading. That the one? He asked. I nodded, trying not to seem too eager. If you looked desperate, you lost leverage. It was one of the many rules I learned from these visits. There was a pause, that long, weighty pause, while both of them did silent math in their heads. And then, a miracle. My mom said, you can get it, but this counts for your birthday too, all right? My eyes went wide. Birthday, that was 2 weeks away. But what could I say? The words yes and thank you tumbled out of me before she could change her mind. I placed the Super Soaker carefully in the cart, like it was made of glass, and held onto the corner with one hand the entire way to the checkout line. The rest of the store faded again. I was still walking through aisles, but my head was already in the backyard. I imagined the heat of the sun on my back, the cold shock of water as it hit my arms, the laughter, the chaos, the chase. The Super Soaker wasn't just a toy. It was the promise of summer itself, of long afternoons with no homework, of lemonade breaks on the porch, of wet footprints on the driveway and towels hanging over chairs to dry. That's what made those moments in the toy store so special. It wasn't just about the thing you wanted. It's about the world that opened up when you imagined having it, the battles, the friendships, the memories you hadn't even made yet. I didn't want the blaster just because it was new. I wanted it because of what it meant. It meant freedom, adventure, joy, and as the cashier scanned it, another soft beep, another treasure claimed. I turned to look at my parents, holding back my biggest smile until I heard the total. My mom raised an eyebrow again, joking, they ain't better water the garden too. That night, I placed the box on my desk, still unopened. I just wanted to stare at it for a while, like it was art, like a dream finally made real. I could barely sleep, thinking about the battles to come. And when I did drift off, I dreamed of backyard jungles and secret hideouts, of foam darts and water sprays under the summer sun. Because sometimes the best parts of childhood didn't come wrapped in fancy boughs. They came in the form of neon-colored plastic, carried out of a store in a noisy bag full of promise. And every now and then, if you begged just the right way, they came home early, even before your birthday. I don't remember exactly how long I stood there that day, just staring at the Super Soaker box on my desk after we came home from Toys R. Maybe it was an hour, maybe more. The golden summer light was fading outside the window, but I didn't want to take my eyes off that bright green plastic. I felt like I had captured a piece of summer before it had even fully begun. But even as I sat there, tired from the excitement, my thoughts drifted back to something else that happened before we reached the checkout. A quieter moment, away from the blasters and battle cries. Before we left the store, I took a short detour. Not one I always planned for, but one I always ended up making, past the noisy toy testers and battery-powered chaos. Somewhere between the educational aisle and the video game wall was a section that seemed to hold a different kind of magic. It was calmer there, quieter somehow. It's the aisle with the board games and puzzles. Did you ever get lost in that part of the store too? Not because you couldn't find your way out, but because you didn't want to. Because every shelf felt like it had a story waiting for you. That's how it always felt to me. The boxes lined up like books in a secret library, each cover more colorful than the last. I'd walk slowly, sometimes dragging my fingertips across the glossy tops of the boxes, reading the titles out loud under my breath like little spells. Mousetrap, Don't Wake Daddy, The Game of Life, Clue, Battleship, Guess Who? There was something comforting about seeing them all together, like spotting familiar faces in a crowd. And then there were the puzzle boxes, stacked high and wide, some with thousands of tiny pieces, promising hours of quiet concentration. Their covers always showed peaceful villages, fields of tulips, vintage cars, or scenes from outer space. There was a kind of stillness in that aisle. You didn't run through it. You wandered, you examined, you daydreamed, and you imagined what a Saturday night might look like if you brought one of those games home. Would it be just you and your sibling fighting over pieces? Or would your cousins join in, shouting over the rules and laughing when someone knocked the board by accident? One box caught my eye that day. It was Candyland. I already knew the game by heart, but the cover still drew me in every time. Those bright colors, the candy cane forests, the gumdrop past it, didn't matter that it was meant for younger kids. So that box was pure imagination, a promise of sweet, simple fun. I turned it around and looked at the back, reading through the little description, even though I had memorized it years ago. It wasn't about the game itself. It was about the memory it carried of sticky fingers, spilled juice, and the sound of dice clattering on a table during a rainy afternoon. Then I noticed a new title I hadn't seen before, Grape Escape. Just the name made me smile. The idea of guiding silly grape characters through a factory full of traps. I picked it up, already laughing quietly as I imagined the squishy Play-Doh grapes being flattened, sliced, or catapulted. Some games weren't just meant to be played. They were meant to be experienced. Did you ever beg to buy a game just because the cover looked cool? I did, more than once. Times, it didn't even matter if the game turned out to be boring. That moment in the store, holding it, imagining all the fun you'd have, that was enough. But other times, a game surprised you, like the time we brought home Perfection and my sister screamed every time the pieces popped up. Or when my cousins came over and we played Twister until we collapsed laughing, a tangle of arms and legs on the carpet. My dad eventually wandered over to find me. I hadn't even realized how long I'd been there. He stood at the end of the aisle, arms crossed, a smile tugging at his lips as he watched me inspect the stack of puzzles. "You building a library back there?" he asked, teasing. I smiled, still holding a box. "Just looking," I said, even though I wasn't ready to put anything back. He walked closer and picked up a puzzle of a covered bridge surrounded by fall leaves. "I used to do ones like this with my dad," he said softly, turning the box over in his hands. "Took us days sometimes, but it was quiet, peaceful, and there it was again. That connection, that thread of shared memory that somehow stretched across decades and generations. I hadn't known he used to do puzzles as a kid. Dan suddenly. The idea of picking one to bring home wasn't just about passing time. It was about doing something together. I ended up choosing a puzzle of the solar system. The planets looked like marbles floating in space, each one glowing under a backdrop of stars. I imagined us sitting at the kitchen table, side by side, sorting through the black pieces first, then finding the bright rings of Saturn, the red dust of Mars. The board games and puzzles, I'll never had flashing lights or sounds. It didn't need them. It whispered rather than shouted. It invited you in, to imagine, to connect, to slow down, dot. And that night, after dinner, while the Super Soaker still sat untouched in my room and the television buzzed with commercials, my dad opened the box and poured the pieces onto the table. The sound they made was soft, like dry leaves falling to the floor. And for the next hour, we built stars together, one piece at a time. That's the part of the toy store people don't always talk about. It's not just the noise and excitement. It's also the quiet moments, ones that ask for nothing but your attention, your curiosity, your time. In those aisles, surrounded by cardboard boxes and smiling cartoon faces, we didn't just buy games. We found pieces of ourselves, of our families, of the stories we didn't even know we were writing. And as the final piece of that puzzle clicked into place later that week, under the soft glow of the kitchen lamp, I realized something I still carry with me. Not just the toys that made the 90s magical. It was the way they brought us together, the way they made time slow down, the way they made a simple Tuesday night feel like an adventure worth remembering forever. I don't remember hearing any official rule that said you could test out the bikes and scooters in the store. Maybe there was a sign somewhere. Oh, maybe an employee would glance over and just ... smile. But the truth is, we all did it. You know what I mean, right? Didn't we all hop on a shiny new bike in the middle of the aisle just to feel that first little push forward? To hear the sound of the tires gliding against the polished store floor? Somehow, that short little ride between shelves felt like you were flying, as if those 10 feet of freedom were enough to imagine your whole summer ahead. It always started the same way. We'd be walking down the main corridor, passing board games, action figures, and plushies, when suddenly we'd spot them, lined up like prize ponies. The bikes and scooters stood tall and ready, their handlebars turned just slightly outward, as if inviting us to come closer. Big wheels, small wheels, neon plastic grips, banana seeds, decals with flames, lightning bolts, or cartoon characters. My eyes would jump from one to the next, overwhelmed in the best way possible. Do you remember the first time you rode a bike inside a toy store? Was it the color that drew you in? It's the way the chrome caught the overhead lights? Or was it the sheer promise that, once you were on, you'd be unstoppable? That day, I spotted a bright red BMX with pegs on the back wheel and knobby tires that looked ready for dirt trails, even though it had never touched the ground outside. The seat was still wrapped in protective plastic. The pedals had never felt a shoe. It was brand new. To me, it looked like it had been waiting for me. I walked, over casually, pretending not to care too much, but I couldn't take my eyes off of it. I wrapped my fingers around the rubber handles, feeling that firm, textured grip. Then I lifted my leg over, slowly, as if mounting a horse. My sneakers found the pedals. For a second, I just sat there, imagining it under the sun, wheels spinning. Through grass and gravel, the sound of wind rushing past my ears. And then, with one small push, pinch, I was off. Just a few feet, maybe 6, maybe 8, not far at all. But in those few seconds, I felt the wind of pretend speed. Quiet, I felt the grip of the tires against the smooth floor. And even though I knew it wasn't mine, even though I knew I'd have to leave it behind, it was mine in that moment. Key belonged to my imagination. My mom called my name from the end of the aisle. I looked up, expecting to be scolded. She just laughed and shook her head, then walked away slowly, giving me one more minute. And that was the thing about those moments. They weren't planned. They weren't bought, but they stayed with you anyway. A little further down, I saw a boy about my age on a scooter. It was one of those folding metal razor ones, silver with blue handles. He wasn't doing tricks or anything, just riding gently in a straight line, back and forth between the bikes and the board games. His face was calm, focused, like he was trying to memorize the feeling of gliding. Why did it feel so different to ride indoors? Maybe it was the contrast. You were surrounded by shelves, by ceilings, by parents and strangers. You weren't supposed to be speeding here. For just those few seconds, the store became something else, a playground, a racetrack, a world without limits. I stepped off the BMX and parked it gently back in its place, taking one last look. I didn't ask for it that day. I knew the Super Soaker had already been a huge victory, but in my heart, I promised myself that one day I'd come back. I'd ride that kind of bike outside, where the sidewalk never ended, next to the bikes. The bigger ride-ons waited for the younger kids. The plastic cars you could sit inside, the ones with Flintstone-style foot pedals. Some even had steering wheels that squeaked when you turned them. I remember giving one of them a spin when I was smaller. Back then, just being able to steer something felt like growing up. There was one in particular, a red and yellow little Tykes Cozy Coupe. You know the one. It's that car with the curved roof, the clicking ignition key, the open floor. I had driven one of those through our entire backyard once, pretending I was going to the grocery store. Now I stood looking at it, taller, older, but somehow still connected. That's what made that owl so special. It wasn't just about the wheels. It was about motion. It's a feeling that something was starting. A summer adventure, a trip around the block, a new chapter in your childhood. Testing a bike, even for 10 seconds, was like dipping your toe into freedom. I watched a little girl with pigtails hop on a pink training wheel bike with streamers. She looked so small, her feet barely reaching the pedals, but the way her face lit up as she moved forward. That was pure magic. Her dad clapped softly and held the back for balance, okay? And in that small, shared moment, everyone nearby felt it too. That spark, that joy. You didn't need to ride far, just enough to feel it, just enough to remember it. And so, as we walked toward the checkout line, with a puzzle in one bag and the water blaster under my arm, I looked back at the aisle one last time. Few kids still hovered near the bikes, some touching, some riding, all dreaming. I gave the BMX a final nod in my mind, like saying goodbye to a friend, because that's what it was like, wasn't it? These weren't just objects. They were companions to our childhood, the first rides toward independence, the first tastes of wind-in-your-hair freedom, the toys that moved us, literally and figuratively. Even today, when I see a kid testing out a bike in a store, just for a few seconds, I smile, because I know exactly what they're feeling, okay? And if I close my eyes, I can still hear the wheels turning on that smooth toy store floor. The echo of a tiny ride in a giant world, a memory in motion. Even before the whoosh of the automatic doors had fully settled behind you, even before the scent of new toys could truly wrap itself around your senses, your eyes were already locked on something monumental. It was impossible to miss. A key. Anyone walk into a Toys R Us in the late 90s and not be drawn instantly to those towering displays of Pac-Man and Barbie? Do you remember the first thing you saw when you walked into the toy store as a kid? It's that massive wall of color, lights, and characters you already knew from your TV, lunchbox, or school backpack. It was like crossing into another dimension. One that only existed on Saturday mornings in cereal commercials until it didn't, until it was right there in front of you. That day, remember walking in, my hands still sticky from a fruit roll-up. I had eaten in the car and feeling my feet come to a full stop. My eyes widened. There it was. On the left, a towering Pikmin display stood tall, practically glowing under the fluorescent lights. Keach's bright yellow face beamed at me from a cardboard standing at least 6 feet high, his cheeks round with that familiar red sparkle. Behind him, shelves were stacked with everything a 90s kid could ever want. Plush toys of Squirtle, Charmander, Bulbasaur, Pokeballs that opened to reveal tiny figures, trading card tins wrapped in shiny cellophane, Game Boy games sealed and lined like treasures waiting for discovery. And on the right, equally grand, equally mesmerizing, was Barbie's Pink Kingdom. It wasn't just a section, it was a universe. Pink arches with the Barbie logo in glittering white welcomed you into a dreamland of fashion, careers, and fairy tales. A rotating display case gently turned, showing off ballerina Barbies in sparkling tutus, astronaut Barbies in silver suits, and beach Barbies with streaks of neon in their hair, all posed like movie stars frozen mid-scene. Their eyes seemed to catch the light and hold it, like they knew exactly how magical they looked. Was it even possible to walk past those displays without stopping? I don't think anyone ever could. Not the kids, not even the parents. There was a gravitational pull to those corners. They were designed to stop you right in your tracks. And they did. I remember shifting my weight between both sides, trying to decide where to go first. Pac-Man had that wild energy, that exciting newness. It felt like being part of something huge, a movement, a club that stretched from schoolyard to television screen to the aisles of this very store. But Barbie had that dreamlike charm, that soft dazzle that made you want to twirl in place or organize tea parties with your favorite dolls. Sometimes, if my cousin was with me, we'd split. I'd rush to Pac-Man, and she'd float over to Barbie. Then later, we'd meet in the middle to share what we found, like explorers comparing maps. That day, I chose Pac-Man. My eyes scanned the shelves, drawn to a limited edition Pikachu figure perched on the edge of a bright red box. It had a small voice chip inside, and when you pressed its tummy, it would shout, "Pika, Pika, quit," in that familiar, high-pitched tone. I picked it up, turned it in my hands, and felt a jolt of excitement. It was the same feeling I had when I pulled a holographic Charizard card out of a booster pack. That sense of winning, of finding something truly special. Next to it was a Pokédex toy, the kind that flipped open like a clamshell and showed pixelated info about each creature. I had wanted that thing since I saw Ash use his in the anime. Holding it made me feel like I had stepped inside the show itself. I didn't even care that it made crackly beeping sounds or that half the functions didn't do what they promised on the box. To me, it was magic. Then I wandered back over to Barbie, just for a peek. There was a Dreamhouse playset open for display. One of the employees had set it up with tiny plates on the table, plastic sandwiches in the kitchen, and a miniature laptop in the living room. The elevator worked too, and when you turned a crank, Barbie could glide up to the second floor. Remember how my cousin used to pretend that Barbie was going to college, or running for president, or launching into space. She had the career collection, the rollerblade Barbie, even the one with the glittering gown whose dress changed colors when dipped in warm water. That kind of imagination where the smallest doll could live the biggest life always fascinated me. It was easy to lose track of time in front of those displays. You'd reach for a figure, glance at a box, and suddenly 20 minutes had passed. I think that's why the entrance was laid out like that. It was meant to transport you before you even realized you were inside. The rest of the store might hold the treasures you'd come for, but those displays near the doors, they were the gatekeepers to the magic. Why did those displays feel larger than life? Maybe because they mirrored everything we were dreaming about outside of the store. Pac-Man meant trading cards on the bus, Game Boy battles on the floor of your room, and stickers on your lunchbox. Barbie meant imagination, without limits, playing dress up, writing stories, creating worlds where anything was possible. They weren't just toys. They were identities, okay? Ways of seeing ourselves and others, okay? And to see them displayed like that, so proudly, so vibrantly, made you feel like your world mattered, okay? Like someone out there understood what made your heart beat faster. That day, I didn't buy anything from those front displays, but I carried the feeling of them with me through every other aisle. The glow of Pikachu, the shimmer of Barbie's dress, the quiet power of being seen before even stepping deeper into the store. It reminded me that joy didn't always come from buying something. Sometimes it came just from being surrounded by the things you loved in a place that seemed built just for you. And now, years later, whenever I see a flash of pink or a little lightning tail on a yellow background, I go back. Not just in memory, but in feeling. I go back to that entrance, those displays, that moment of wonder that didn't need to last long to last forever. There was a shift in the air the moment I made my decision. It wasn't dramatic, but I could feel it. As if the store itself, with all its rows of blinking lights and shelves stacked to the ceiling, had given me a soft nod. I held the Pokédex in both hands, pressing it close to my chest like it might fly away if I loosened my grip. For a moment, I didn't walk. I just stood there in the aisle, clutching it, smiling. Tease was the toy, my toy. And now, it was time for the final step. Have you ever held something so tightly? Not out of fear, but out of pure joy? Like the moment you finally have what you've been dreaming about. You're afraid to blink, afraid it might disappear. That's how it felt, walking slowly toward the front of the store with my mom. My feet lighter than air, the Pokédex pressed firmly against my ribs. I didn't even want a bag. I wanted to feel it with me, every step of the way. At that moment, wasn't about what it cost or what it could do. It was about what it meant. The journey from the back aisles to the front counter suddenly felt different now. The music playing overhead, which earlier had just been part of the background, now felt like a soundtrack. The store lights seemed brighter, the space wider, and yet it was just me and this little red rectangle of plastic. I imagined myself walking down a red carpet instead of a linoleum floor. Flashes of imaginary cameras in the distance, as if to say, here comes the kid who found his perfect toy. Did you do that too? Imagine you were in a movie as you walked with your toy. Maybe not every time, but sometimes it felt like the moment needed a little drama, especially after such an intense decision. My mom kept looking down at me, probably wondering how I could be so still, so careful, as if I were carrying a newborn kitten. But she didn't rush me. She just smiled and let me have my moment. When we reached the checkout line, I noticed how quiet I had become. There were other kids around me, some still whining for last-minute toys, others spinning the impulse racks filled with tiny rubber balls and bendy erasers. But I wasn't tempted, not anymore. My hands were full. My heart was full. I remember watching the woman behind the counter scan the Pokédex. There was a brief beep, and then she set it on the counter just beside the register, ready to be bagged. But before she could move, I leaned forward, gently reached for it, and asked softly, "Can I hold it until we leave?" She chuckled, nodded, and let me take it back into my hands. It felt like the world was right again. Why did we hold our new toys so tightly? Because it's not just a thing we're carrying. It's a dream realized, a wish answered. All the commercials we'd seen, all the catalogs we'd circled, all the birthdays we counted down to, they all pointed to this moment. This was proof that good things did happen. Sometimes what you wanted most could come true, even if it took time. Okay? Holding that toy was like holding a piece of that truth. As we stepped out through the automatic doors, I could feel the difference between walking in and walking out. When I entered earlier, everything had felt like a question. What would I find? What would I want? What would I leave behind? But now, stepping into the sunlight with my toy still clutched in both hands, everything felt like an answer. The air outside smelled like fresh pavement and faint car exhaust, but it couldn't compete with the lingering scent of the store still, clinging to the toy, that soft mix of plastic, cardboard, and something almost like sugar. I inhaled it, slowly, quietly, and smiled to myself. Tamed, my Pokédex mind, I buckled into the back seat of the car, still refusing to put the toy down, not even for a second. I traced the edges with my fingers, turned it over to read the small text on the label, and even whispered to it, "You're gonna be my best friend this summer." I believed it. That toy was already alive in my mind. My mom asked me if I wanted to open it on the ride home. I shook my head. "Not yet," I said. "I want to wait until I'm in my room." There was something sacred about unboxing it in the quiet of my space, where the walls already knew my secrets, where the shelves would welcome it like family. As the car pulled out of the parking lot, I looked back at the store one last time. Toys R Us, big, bold letters shining in the sun. And for just a second, I imagined that the giraffe mascot in the logo was smiling down at me. Not just for buying something, but for believing in something, for dreaming big in a world made for kids with big imaginations. That toy may have only cost $29.99, but to me, it felt like a treasure chest. Not because of its features or its buttons or how cool it looked on the commercials, but because of what it symbolized: the joy of longing, the magic of choosing, and the quiet triumph of carrying something home that meant everything to you. And even now, after all these years, I remember the feeling of my fingers wrapped tightly around that box. I remember how safe I felt, how proud I was, and I realized that the real treasure wasn't the toy itself. It was that moment, that very moment when I knew what it meant to want something, to get it, and to hold it like it held the universe inside. Because sometimes the smallest box can carry the biggest memories. I lasted maybe 7 minutes in the car before I gave in. The Pokédex sat warm in my hands. Till I had promised myself I'd wait until I got to my room. The temptation was too much. I looked over at my mom, who was humming softly to some song on the radio, and whispered, "Can I open it now?" She nodded without even glancing back, her focus on the road. That nod was all I needed. I carefully peeled back the small tape seals, not wanting to tear the box. That was part of the ritual, keeping the packaging as perfect as possible, like it was sacred. I slid the inner cardboard tray out slowly, hearing that faint squeak of glossy material rubbing against itself. The Pokédex sat snug in a molded plastic cradle, wrapped in a small, clear bag. Underneath, the folded instruction manual rested like a treasure map, waiting to be explored. Do you remember reading the back of toy boxes like they were novels? Okay? Did it every single time. Even if I already knew what the toy did from watching countless commercials, I still read it again and again. The blurbs, the feature lists, the slogans in all caps, no, every packaging instantly. Digitized voice. Try me. It didn't matter that I already had the toy in my hands. Reading those words somehow made it feel more real, like the magic needed to be spoken aloud, even silently, to activate itself. I held the Pokédex close, still wrapped in its little plastic coat, tilted it toward the sunlight that streaked through the window. The red casing gleamed, smooth and flawless. It looked even better out of the box, more alive somehow. I turned it over in my hands, fingers trailing over every button, every curve. I didn't press anything yet. Not until I had read every single word on the box again. And again, and again. There was a part on the back that listed the battery information. And I remember worrying for a second. Did it come with batteries? So I flipped the box upside down and checked the tiny print near the barcode. Batteries included. Relief washed over me. Could feel the excitement building in my chest, like a balloon inflating one slow breath at a time. As we drove through the familiar streets of our neighborhood, I tuned out the world outside, the people on the sidewalks, the flickering signs of gas stations, the stoplights blinking green and red. They were background noise. All I saw was my toy and the box. I kept it on my lap and read the text on the sides, even the fine print. Made in China, ages 5 and up. Conforms to safety standards. I didn't care what it said. If it was on the box, it was worth knowing. The instruction manual, folded like a tiny pamphlet, was just as magical. Inside were diagrams, showing how to press the buttons to scroll through Pokédex entries, how to access data on Bulbasaur, Pikachu, Charmander, and the rest. It even had a troubleshooting section, though I didn't need it. Not yet. I was still in the discovery phase, still marveling at every detail. Why did we do that? Why did we reread boxes and manuals like sacred scrolls? Maybe because it extended. The moment opening the toy wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Those words, those glossy photos and arrows pointing to buttons, they were like a slow drum roll to the main act. The adventure hadn't started yet, but I was already living in its prologue. The car hit a small bump, and I instinctively clutched the Pokédex tighter. It was silly, but it felt like I was protecting something delicate, something important. Even now, I can still feel that instinct in my hands, the way they curved perfectly around the toy's shape, as if it had been made just for me. I finally pressed the power button. A small chime rang out. Digital, a little fuzzy, but beautiful. The tiny screen lit up with a pixelated logo, and I smiled like the world had just been invented. Welcome, it read. Pokédex activated. Cod. I tapped the button, and the voice began its robotic, slightly garbled narration for the first entry, Bulbasaur, the Seed Pachyman. My heart swelled. My mom glanced into the rearview mirror and grinned. Cool, huh? I nodded, barely able to speak. There weren't words big enough to explain what I was feeling, not even now. It was more than just cool. It was everything. As we pulled into the driveway, I stayed seated, still scrolling through entries, still exploring. I didn't want to stop, even as the engine went quiet and the sunlight shifted through the windshield. I stayed in my little pocket of joy, discovering what came next. Every click of a button was a step deeper into that imaginary world. Eventually, I got out of the car, still holding the toy. The box, now slightly bent at the corners, was tucked under my arm. I wasn't ready to throw it away. Not yet, maybe. Not ever. I carried everything inside like sacred cargo, tiptoeing through the doorway into the house that had become a stage for so many past adventures. That afternoon, I sat cross-legged on my bedroom floor, Pokédex in hand, the manual spread out beside me. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip, casting golden light across my walls. Inside, I was already somewhere else entirely, a world of data, exploration, and imaginary Pac-Man waiting to be found. I had everything I needed, and now, so many years later, I could still remember the weight of that toy in my hands, the smell of the packaging, the flicker of the screen, the warmth of the car seat against my back as I read the box for the sixth time. I remember the feeling of excitement that bloomed before I even opened it. It's how the adventure had already begun before the plastic was ever peeled away. Because sometimes the magic doesn't wait for batteries or unboxing or even the drive home. Sometimes the magic starts the second you dream about something and see it come true right there on your lap as the sun spills through a car window, and your childhood quietly locks in another golden memory you'll never forget.